Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Terra's Pride, watching the stars through the main screen. His ship had been traveling through space for 3 weeks now, looking for new planets that humans could visit. The crew was getting tired, but Jake knew they had to keep going. Earth needed to know what was out here in the dark spaces between the known worlds. Lisa Grant sat at her station, checking the ship's path through space. She was the best navigation officer Jake had ever worked with. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls as she made sure they stayed on course. Next to her, Carlos Rivera watched the ship's engines. He was a quiet man who could fix anything that broke on the ship. Behind them, Dr. Helen Brooks looked at her science readings, always hoping to find something new and exciting. The ship flew through empty space for hours. Jake was thinking about turning back when Lisa suddenly sat up straight. She pressed her hand to her ear, listening to something through her headset. Her face changed from bored to worried in just a few seconds. "Captain," Lisa said, turning to look at Jake. "I'm getting a signal. It's very weak, but it sounds like someone asking for help." Jake walked over to her station. "Where is it coming from?" Lisa pointed to a star on her screen. "That system over there. We don't have any records of anyone living there. The signal is strange, though. It doesn't sound like any language I know." Dr. Brooks looked up from her work. "Can you play it for us?" Lisa pressed a button, and strange sounds filled the bridge. It was like music and crying mixed together. The sounds went up and down in a pattern that seemed to repeat. Everyone on the bridge stopped what they were doing to listen. There was something in those sounds that made them feel sad and scared at the same time. "That's not human," Carlos said quietly. "But it sounds like they need help." Jake thought for a moment. Their mission was to explore, not to rescue anyone, but he couldn't ignore people who might be in trouble. "Lisa, how long would it take us to get there?" "About 6 hours if we go fast," she answered. "Do it," Jake said. "If someone needs help, we should try to help them." The Terra's Pride changed course and headed toward the unknown star system. As they got closer, Dr. Brooks started getting more readings on her instruments. "There's definitely a planet there," she said. "And Jake, you're going to want to see this. The planet is giving off energy readings I've never seen before." When they finally reached the planet, everyone on the bridge stared in wonder. The world below them was beautiful beyond anything they had ever seen. The surface sparkled like it was covered in diamonds. Blue and green lights danced across the land in patterns that looked almost alive. The oceans were a deep purple color, and strange crystal formations grew up from the water like frozen lightning. "I'm getting life signs," Dr. Brooks said, her voice full of excitement. "Lots of them, but they're different from any life forms we know about." Jake made his decision quickly. "We're going down to the surface. Lisa, find us a safe place to land. Carlos, make sure the ship is ready for anything. Helen, get your equipment ready to study whatever we find down there." They landed the ship near what looked like a city made of crystal. The buildings were tall and thin, twisting up toward the sky like glass trees. Everything seemed to glow with its own soft light. As the crew put on their spacesuits and left the ship, they could see figures moving in the crystal city. The beings that came to meet them were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They were tall and thin, almost 7 feet high. Their skin looked like it was made of clear crystal, and light moved through their bodies in slow waves. They had long arms and legs, and their faces were gentle and kind. When they moved, they seemed to float rather than walk. One of the crystal beings came forward. When it spoke, the humans could understand the words even though they had never heard this language before. The sounds seemed to go directly into their minds. "Welcome, travelers. From the distant star," the being said. "I am called Zethara. We have been hoping someone would hear our call for help." Dr. Brooks stepped forward, her scientific training taking over her fear. "We're from Earth. We heard your signal and came to see if we could help. What's wrong?" Zethara's crystal face showed sadness. "Our people are dying. For many years the Chronari have been coming to our world. They take our people and they take the crystals that grow in our sacred places. We cannot stop them because we do not know how to fight. Fighting is not in our nature." Jake felt anger growing in his chest. "Someone is attacking you and taking your people?" "Yes," Zethara said. The Chronari use our crystals to make weapons. They use our people as slaves in their minds. We asked the Galactic Council for help, but they said we must learn to defend ourselves. But we cannot. Violence is impossible for us. It would be like asking you to stop breathing. Dr. Brooks was looking at her readings. Captain, these beings are amazing. Their technology is far ahead of ours, but it's all focused on healing and growing things. I don't see any weapons anywhere. Carlos walked up to touch one of the crystal buildings. It's warm, he said with wonder.
The whole building is alive somehow. Zathara nodded. Everything here grows instead of being built. We shape the crystals with our minds and our care. We can heal injuries that would kill most beings. We can make dead land green again. But
we cannot make weapons. We cannot hurt other living things. It is not possible for us. Jake looked around at the beautiful city and the gentle crystal people. He thought about the Chronari taking these peaceful beings as slaves. He thought about the Galactic Council refusing to help. How many of your people are left? On this world, perhaps 50,000, Zathara said. But there used to be millions of us across many worlds. The Chronari have taken most of our colonies. We are among the last. Dr. Brooks put her hand on Jake's arm. We have to help them. Jake nodded. Zathara, we want to help your people, but we need to know more about these Chronari and about the Galactic Council. Can you tell us everything? As the crystal being began to tell them about the galaxy beyond Earth's small corner of space, Jake realized that his simple exploration mission had just become something much bigger and much more dangerous. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood in the war room on Earth, looking at the report that Captain Morrison had sent from the Crystal World. The pictures of the beautiful Villani people and their dying civilization filled the screens around her. She had read the report 3 times, and each time it made her more angry. Around the table sat the leaders of Earth's space program. General Marcus Webb rubbed his tired eyes as he finished reading. Ambassador Richard Stone sat quietly, thinking about what this meant for humanity's place in the galaxy. Commander Susan Blake studied the technical data about the Chronari Empire with the focus of a trained spy. So let me understand this, General Webb said slowly. There's a whole galactic government out there that we don't know about, and they're letting these Chronari monsters kill an entire race of peaceful people because nobody wants to get involved. Ambassador Stone nodded. According to Morrison's report, the Galactic Council has over 200 member species. Earth isn't even on their list. As far as they're concerned, we're still too primitive to matter. Admiral Hayes turned to face the group. That's going to change. I'm sending a diplomatic mission to this council station. We need to tell them what we know and demand that they help the Villani. Commander Blake looked up from her datapad. Admiral, I've been studying the information about the Chronari Empire. These aren't just raiders or pirates. They have a military that spans dozens of star systems. Their technology is hundreds of years ahead of ours. If we make them angry, then we deal with it. Admiral Hayes cut her off. I won't sit here and let genocide happen just because we're scared. Ambassador Stone cleared his throat. I'll lead the diplomatic mission, but we should be prepared for the possibility that they won't listen to us. 2 weeks later, Ambassador Stone stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Council station. The station was huge, bigger than any human city. Representatives from hundreds of different species sat in circles that rose up toward the ceiling. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that Stone had trouble even looking at them. The council president was a massive creature called Thurak. He had gray skin like stone and eyes that glowed red. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like thunder. Next to him sat other powerful beings who controlled different parts of the galaxy. Stone had practiced his speech many times, but standing in this chamber made him feel very small. He activated his translator and began to speak. Honored council members, I come from Earth to speak about a great injustice happening in our galaxy. He showed them pictures of the Villani and their crystal cities. He told them about the Chronari attacks and the peaceful people who were being killed and enslaved. The chamber was quiet as he spoke, but Stone could see that many of the council members looked bored or annoyed. When he finished, President Thurak leaned forward. Human ambassador, You speak of things that do not concern your primitive world. The Villani situation has been discussed many times. The Council has decided that evolution favors the strong. If the Villani cannot defend themselves, then perhaps they are not meant to survive. Stone felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice calm. You're talking about genocide, about the murder of an entire species. How can you just ignore that? A spider-like creature with multiple eyes spoke up. The Kronari Empire provides valuable military services to many Council worlds. They keep the peace in dangerous regions of space. We cannot risk that relationship for the sake of one weak species. Another voice came from a being that looked like living metal. The Villani have had centuries to develop weapons. They chose to remain weak. That is their failure, not ours. Stone looked around the chamber and saw the truth in their faces. Most of these beings didn't care about the Villani at all. Some were even profiting from their deaths. So you're just going to let it happen? President Thurak's red eyes glowed brighter. Human, you would be wise to return to your small world and forget about galactic affairs. Your species is young and weak. Do not make the mistake of challenging powers beyond your understanding. The threat was clear. Stone gathered his papers and left the chamber knowing that diplomacy had failed. Meanwhile, Commander Blake had been busy with her own mission. Using her training as a spy, she had broken into the Council's information systems. What she found there was worse than anyone had imagined. She sat in her small ship, hidden in an asteroid field, reading through stolen data files. The Kronari weren't just killing the Villani for their crystals. They were planning to use those crystals to build weapons that could destroy entire star systems. The Council leaders knew about this plan and were helping to hide it. President Thurak had received millions of credits from the Kronari in exchange for keeping the Council from interfering. Other species were being paid to provide the Kronari with ships and weapons. The genocide wasn't just being ignored, it was being supported by the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Blake also found files about other species that were being hunted and killed. The Nere, who lived in the deep oceans of water worlds, were being harvested for their ability to breathe in any liquid. The Zephyrians, who could share thoughts across vast distances, were being captured and forced to work as living communication systems. The Luminari, beings made of pure energy, were being drained to power Kronari weapons. The galaxy was full of species being murdered and enslaved, and the Galactic Council was helping it happen. Blake sent her data back to Earth using secret channels. When Admiral Hayes saw the files, she called an emergency meeting of Earth's leaders. President Kevin Walsh sat at the head of the table, looking older than his years. Around him sat military commanders, scientists, and government officials. The weight of what they had learned pressed down on everyone in the room. So the entire galactic government is corrupt, President Walsh said quietly. They're not just ignoring genocide, they're profiting from it. General Webb slammed his fist on the table. We can't let this continue. If we do nothing, we're just as guilty as they are. But what can we do? Asked Dr. Sarah Kim, Earth's chief scientist. We have maybe 100 ships that can travel between stars. They have thousands. We're one small planet against an entire galaxy. Admiral Hayes stood up. We do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds. We fight anyway. We save who we can save, and we make the enemy pay for every life they take. Ambassador Stone, who had returned from his failed mission, spoke up. The Council made it clear that if we interfere, they'll consider it an act of war against the Galactic Order. President Walsh was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up at the faces around the table. Throughout human history, we've faced moments when we had to choose between what was safe and what was right. This is one of those moments. He stood up slowly. I'm authorizing a military intervention. We're going to the Villani homeworld, and we're going to save as many of those people as we can. If the galaxy wants to call that an act of war, then so be it. As the meeting ended and people filed out to prepare for humanity's first galactic war, Admiral Hayes stayed behind. She looked out the window at the stars and wondered if they were making the right choice. Earth was small and weak compared to the powers they were about to challenge. But then she thought about the gentle crystal, people who had never hurt anyone, and she knew there was no choice at all. Colonel Danny Foster stood on the deck of the battleship Earth's Resolve, watching his Marines prepare for their first battle against an alien enemy. Around him, men and women checked their weapons and equipment with the calm focus of professional soldiers. They all knew they were probably going to die, but none of them had asked to stay behind. Next to him, pilot Rachel Torres adjusted her flight suit. She would be leading the fighter squadrons that would protect the big ships during the battle. Her hands were steady, but Danny could see the worry in her eyes. They were going up against technology they didn't fully understand, piloted by aliens, who had been fighting wars since before humans invented writing. Lieutenant Commander Alan Pierce studied tactical displays that showed the Chronari forces moving toward the Villani homeworld. As the fleet's tactical specialist, it was his job to find a way to win against impossible odds. The numbers weren't good. The Chronari had 50 ships to humanity's 20, and each of their ships was bigger and more powerful than anything Earth had ever built. Dr. Sophie Martin checked her medical supplies one more time. As the fleet's chief medical officer, she would be treating wounded humans and trying to save as many Villani as possible. She had studied the files about Villani biology, but she was worried about treating people so different from humans. The fleet had been traveling for 2 weeks to reach the Villani system. During that time, Admiral Hayes had drilled them constantly on their mission. They weren't here to win a war. They were here to save lives. Their job was to evacuate as many Villani as possible and get them to safety before the Chronari could complete their genocide. Captain Morrison had stayed on the Villani homeworld to help coordinate the evacuation. His reports painted a grim picture. The Chronari had surrounded the planet with their ships, cutting off all escape routes. They were taking their time, landing troops to hunt down Villani and their crystal cities and sacred groves. Danny remembered the video messages Morrison had sent back to Earth. The crystal beings moved like living art, their bodies glowing with soft light as they tried to hide their children in the deep caverns beneath their cities. They couldn't fight back. Violence was literally impossible for them. When Chronari soldiers appeared, the Villani could only run or surrender. "Colonel," Rachel said quietly, "do you really think we can do this?" Danny looked at the tactical display, showing the Chronari fleet. Their ships were massive things covered in weapons and armor. Intelligence reports said they had been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years. "Honestly, probably not. But we're going to try anyway." Alan Pierce turned from his instruments. "I've been studying their attack patterns from the battles they've fought against other species. They rely on overwhelming firepower and superior technology. They're not used to enemies who fight dirty." "What do you mean?" Danny asked. Alan smiled grimly. "They fight like they expect their enemies to follow rules. They've been the strongest force in the galaxy for so long that they've forgotten how to deal with desperate people who have nothing to lose." The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Villani system. Immediately, alarms began sounding throughout the ships. The Chronari had detected them and were moving to intercept. Admiral Hayes's voice came over the communication system to every ship in the fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. Today we fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. Today, we show the galaxy that humans don't abandon the innocent. Whatever happens, make them remember that we were here." The Chronari fleet moved toward them, like a wall of death. Their ships were huge and angular, covered in weapons that could destroy a human ship with a single shot. The Chronari commander sent a message demanding that the humans surrender immediately, or be destroyed. Admiral Hayes sent back a simple reply: "Go to hell." The battle began with the Chronari firing their massive weapons at the human fleet. The first shots destroyed 2 human ships instantly, turning them into clouds of metal and fire. But instead of retreating, the human ships split up and attacked from different directions. Rachel led her fighter squadrons in a desperate charge against the Chronari flagship. The alien point defense systems destroyed half her fighters in the first few seconds, but the survivors got through and planted explosive charges on the ship's weapon systems. The flagship's main guns went silent, just as it was about to destroy Admiral Hayes's command ship. Danny's Marines launched in small assault craft toward the planet's surface. Their job was to reach the Villani cities and help coordinate the evacuation. The Chronari had troops on the ground hunting the Crystal people, and Danny's job was to keep those troops busy while the Villani escaped. The assault craft dodged through burning wreckage from the space battle above. 3 of the 6 craft were shot down before they reached the planet, but Danny's craft made it through. They landed in a crystal forest near one of the Villani cities, where Captain Morrison was waiting with a group of Villani civilians. "Colonel," Morrison called out as Danny and his Marines left their craft. "The evacuation ships are on their way, but we need to hold this position for at least an hour." Danny looked around at the strange crystal trees that grew like frozen lightning from the purple soil. In the distance, he could see Chronari troops moving through the forest, hunting for Villani refugees. "How many people are we trying to save?" "About 3,000 from this city alone," Morrison replied. "There are more groups scattered across the planet." The Villani civilians huddled together near the assault craft. They were beautiful in their strange way, their crystal bodies glowing with fear and hope. Children clung to their parents while the adults tried to comfort them. None of them understood why these strange aliens from Earth were risking their lives to help. Zethara, the Villani elder that Morrison had first met, approached Danny. The crystal being's mental voice was filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Human, warrior, why do your people do this for us? You could have stayed safe on your world." Danny checked his weapon and looked toward the approaching Chronari forces. "Because it's the right thing to do. That's reason enough." The battle for the crystal forest lasted for 3 hours. Danny's Marines used every dirty trick they could think of. Improvised explosives, sniper attacks, and ambushes from the crystal treetops. The Chronari were better armed and armored, but they fought like they expected their enemies to stand still and die. They weren't prepared for humans who crawled through mud, hid behind trees, and attacked from unexpected directions. Above them, the space battle raged on. Human ships darted between the massive Chronari vessels like angry insects, too small and fast to hit easily but dangerous when they got close. Admiral Hayes had turned the battle into a series of running fights, never letting the Chronari use their superior firepower effectively. The evacuation ships finally arrived, converted cargo vessels that could carry thousands of people at once. As the Villani civilians rushed aboard, Danny watched more Chronari reinforcements landing on the planet. They had saved 3,000 people, but there were still tens of thousands more scattered across the world. "We can't save them all," Morrison said quietly, watching the evacuation ships prepare to leave. "No," Danny agreed. "But we saved these, and that's better than saving none." As the human fleet retreated from the Villani system, they carried 40,000 Villani refugees to safety. It was only a fraction of the people on the planet, but it was 40,000 people who would live to see another day. The cost had been terrible. Half the human fleet was destroyed or damaged. Hundreds of humans had died in the battle. But as Admiral Hayes looked at the rescued Villani in the cargo holds of her ships, she knew it had been worth it. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as too primitive to matter. Today, they had learned that sometimes primitive people fight harder than civilized ones. The Chronari Empire had expected an easy victory, but instead they had been bloodied by an enemy they had never heard of. As the human fleet limped back toward Earth with their rescued passengers, Admiral Hayes sent a message to the Galactic Council. It was short and simple. "This is what humans do when we see genocide. Get used to it." General Marcus Webb stood in the command center deep beneath Earth's surface, watching reports pour in from across the solar system. 3 months had passed since the rescue mission to the Villani homeworld, and the galaxy had responded with fury. The Chronari Empire had declared war on humanity, and half the Galactic Council was secretly helping them. The screens around him showed the defensive positions that humanity had built throughout the solar system. Space stations bristled with weapons, while hidden bases on asteroids and moons watched for approaching enemies. Earth itself was surrounded by orbital defense platforms that could destroy any ship that came too close. Commander Susan Blake walked up to his station, carrying reports from her spy network. In the months since the Villani rescue, she had built a secret information system that reached across the galaxy. What she had learned was both terrifying and hopeful. "The Chronari are coming," she said without any greeting. 500 ships, maybe more. They'll be here in 2 weeks. General Webb nodded grimly. He had expected this. What about our friends in the council? Susan smiled coldly. 3 species are secretly providing the Chronari with ships and weapons. But we've also found others who are starting to question the council's policies. The Nere sent a secret message offering to share intelligence about Chronari movements. The Zephyrians are hiding refugees from other species the Chronari have been hunting. On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Morrison had become something like a legend among the oppressed peoples. His ship, now called the Freedom's Light, traveled between hidden colonies where refugees from a dozen different species lived in safety. The Villani he had rescued had used their crystal-growing technology to build new homes on planets that nobody else wanted. Dr. Helen Brooks worked with Villani scientists in their secret laboratories, combining human engineering with Villani crystal technology. The results were weapons and tools that neither species could have created alone. Human ships now carried crystal-powered shields that could absorb energy attacks, while Villani healing crystals kept human soldiers fighting long after they should have collapsed. But the biggest change was in the Villani themselves. While they still couldn't fight directly, they had found other ways to contribute to the war. Their telepathic abilities let them coordinate attacks across vast distances, and their healing powers meant that the coalition forces could fight longer and harder than anyone expected. Admiral Hayes had moved her headquarters to a hidden base in the asteroid belt. From there, she commanded a growing fleet of ships from multiple species. The human ships were still the backbone of the force, but they were joined by Neri water ships that could fight in any liquid environment. Zephyrian hive vessels that moved like living things, and even some luminary energy beings who had escaped from Chronari prison camps. The war had spread across the galaxy in ways that nobody had expected. What had started as a human rescue mission had become a revolution by all the species that the Galactic Council had forgotten or abandoned. Colonel Foster, now promoted to general, led ground forces on a dozen different worlds. His Marines had learned to work alongside alien soldiers whose weapons and tactics were completely different from anything humans understood. Together, they raided Chronari supply bases and freed prisoner camps full of enslaved beings. Rachel Torres commanded a fighter wing that included pilots from 6 different species. Her squadron attacked Chronari convoys and communication stations, always moving too fast for the heavy Chronari ships to catch them. She had become famous throughout the coalition for her ability to lead mixed-species fighter groups in attacks that seemed impossible. Dr. Sophie Martin ran field hospitals that treated wounded from dozens of different species. Working with Villani healers, she had learned medical techniques that seemed like magic to human doctors. Soldiers who should have died from their wounds were walking again within days, thanks to the combination of human medicine and Villani crystal healing. The tide of the war began to turn when Captain Morrison's intelligence network discovered a secret Chronari research facility. The base was hidden in an asteroid field in neutral space, far from any inhabited systems. According to the stolen data, the Chronari were using captured Villani there to create a weapon that could destroy entire star systems. Admiral Hayes knew they had to stop the weapon before it could be completed. She gathered the largest fleet the coalition had ever assembled, over 200 ships from a dozen different species. The attack on the research facility would either cripple the Chronari war effort or destroy the coalition in the attempt. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The Chronari had turned the entire asteroid field into a fortress, with hidden weapons and shields protecting the research station. But the coalition forces fought with a desperation and coordination that the Chronari couldn't match. Villani telepaths linked the minds of pilots from different species, letting them fight as one organism. Nere water ships flowed through spaces too small for normal vessels, attacking from unexpected directions. Zephyrian hive ships divided into smaller craft that swarmed over Chronari defenses like angry insects. In the center of it all, human ships pressed forward with the stubborn determination that had become their trademark. They took terrible losses, but they never stopped advancing. General Foster's Marines fought their way through the research station, while Dr. Brooks worked to understand the terrible weapon the Chronari had been building. When the battle was over, the research facility was destroyed, and its horrific weapon was never completed. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Nearly half the coalition fleet was destroyed, and thousands of beings had died in the fighting. However, the battle had another effect that nobody expected. The news of the coalition's victory spread throughout the galaxy, carried by traders and travelers who had witnessed the fight. For the first time in centuries, the Chronari Empire had suffered a major defeat. More importantly, species that had been silent for generations began to speak out against the Galactic Council's policies. President Walsh received secret messages from over 30 species asking for help or offering to join the coalition. War that had started as a simple rescue mission was becoming a galaxy-wide revolution against corruption and oppression. Back on Earth, engineers worked day and night to build new ships using the hybrid technology that Dr. Brooks had developed. The new vessels were faster and more powerful than anything humanity had ever created, powered by Volani crystals and armed with weapons that combined the best ideas from multiple species. As reports came in of Chronari forces retreating from several systems, General Webb allowed himself to hope that they might actually win this war. The galaxy's forgotten peoples were finding their voice, and humanity had given them the courage to speak. But he also knew that the hardest battles were still ahead. The Galactic Council would not give up their power easily, and the Chronari Empire still had thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. The real test would come when they reached the Council Station itself, where the corrupt leaders who had allowed genocide to happen were waiting behind the strongest defenses in the galaxy. The revolution had begun, but it was far from over. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the massive structure ahead of them. The Galactic Council Station was the size of a small moon, covered in defense platforms and surrounded by the largest fleet anyone had ever assembled. After 2 years of war across the galaxy, this would be the final battle. Around his ship, the coalition fleet stretched as far as the eye could see. Human vessels flew alongside ships from 43 different species, all united in their determination to end the corrupt rule of the Galactic Council. The fleet was smaller than it had been at the beginning of the war. Too many good beings had died in the fighting, but it was stronger in spirit than ever before. President Walsh had come personally for this battle, bringing with him the entire remaining Earth fleet. He stood beside Morrison on the bridge, looking older than his years, but determined to see this through to the end. "Hard to believe it started with one distress signal," he said quietly. Morrison nodded, thinking about the Volani and their crystal cities. So much had changed since that first day when they heard the call for help. The gentle crystal beings were now essential members of the coalition, using their telepathic abilities to coordinate the vast fleet and their healing powers to keep the warriors fighting. Zethara was on the bridge with them, the Volani elder's crystal body glowing with determination. Though the Volani still could not fight directly, they had found ways to contribute that were just as important. Their ability to sense emotions and intentions had uncovered dozens of spies and saboteurs, while their technological knowledge had helped create weapons that could punch through the Council's best defenses. Dr. Helen Brooks was in the ship's laboratory, working with scientists from multiple species to analyze the Council Station's weaknesses. After years of fighting, she had become as much a military strategist as a scientist. The hybrid technologies she had helped create were now standard throughout the coalition fleet. General Foster commanded the ground forces that would assault the station if the space battle went well. His Marines now fought alongside soldiers from dozens of worlds united by their shared hatred of oppression. They had learned each other's languages and tactics, becoming a truly combined force. Rachel Torres led the largest fighter wing in galactic history. Her pilots came from species that had been enemies for centuries, but they followed her orders without question. She had become a symbol of the coalition's unity, proof that different peoples could work together when they had a common cause. Commander, Blake's intelligence network had finally uncovered the full scope of the Council's corruption. The evidence was overwhelming. Bribes, secret deals, and deliberate genocide, all approved by the beings who claimed to represent galactic civilization. When the fighting was over, There would be trials for those who had enabled so much suffering. The battle began when the Council fleet moved forward to engage the Coalition forces. President Thurak himself commanded the Council's forces from a massive dreadnought that was larger than most space stations. His fleet outnumbered the Coalition 2-1, but Morrison had learned not to judge battles by numbers alone. The Coalition fleet split into multiple groups, each attacking from a different direction. Human ships led desperate charges against the Council's heavy vessels, while Narai water ships flowed through gaps in the enemy formation. Zephyrian hive vessels swarmed over isolated Council ships, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. But the real surprise came from species that had been silent members of the Council for centuries. As the battle raged, ships from the Aldari Confederation suddenly turned their weapons on their former allies. The Terran Commonwealth broke away from the Council forces and began attacking the very fleet they had been part of minutes before. Morrison realized what was happening. All across the galaxy, species that had been afraid to speak out were finally finding their courage. The Coalition's example had shown them that the Council could be challenged, and they were choosing freedom over fear. The space battle raged for hours, with ships from both sides dying in silent explosions of light and metal. But slowly, the Coalition forces pushed forward toward the massive station. Rachel's fighters cleared a path through the defense platforms, while the capital ships provided covering fire for the assault transports. General Foster's Marines launched from their ships in small attack craft, racing toward the station's docking bays. The Council had troops waiting for them, but the Coalition forces had been preparing for this assault for months. They fought their way through the station's corridors with a determination born of 2 years of war. Inside the station, the fighting was brutal and close. Council troops had the advantage of knowing the terrain, but Foster's Marines had learned to adapt to any situation. They were joined by Nere warriors who could fight in flooded sections of the station, and by Zephyrian soldiers who coordinated their attacks through their hive mind connection. The breakthrough came when Dr. Brooks discovered that the station's main power source was a massive Vellani crystal that had been stolen centuries ago. Working with Zethara, she found a way to turn the crystal against its captors. The station's own power source began to overload the defense systems. President Thurak made his last stand in the Council chamber, surrounded by his most loyal guards. When Foster's Marines finally reached him, the massive alien was still defiant. "You think you have won?" he growled. "The strong will always rule the weak, that is the way of nature." President Walsh entered the chamber behind the Marines, looking tired but resolute. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But today, the weak stood together and became strong." The surrender of the Council station marked the end of the war, but it was only the beginning of the real work. In the months that followed, representatives from hundreds of species gathered to create a new government for the galaxy. The Galactic Democratic Alliance was built on principles that the old Council had forgotten: equality, mutual protection, and the rights of all sentient beings. Every species, no matter how small or weak, would have a voice in the new government. Admiral Morrison became the first human representative to the Alliance Council, while Zethara spoke for the Vellani and dozens of other peaceful species. The Gate, Nere, Zephyrians, and Luminari all took their rightful places as equals rather than victims. The Chronari Empire was broken up, its member worlds given the choice to join the Alliance or remain independent. Many of the Chronari themselves, freed from their militaristic government, chose to help rebuild the worlds they had damaged. Dr. Brooks established the Galactic Science Institute, where researchers from all species worked together to advance knowledge and technology. The healing crystals that the Vellani shared freely became the foundation for medical advances that saved millions of lives. General Foster created the Alliance Defense Force, a military organization dedicated to protecting the weak rather than conquering them. Its soldiers came from every member species, trained to work together and to never forget the lessons of the war. Years later, Admiral Morrison visited a Vellani colony world, where crystal gardens grew in patterns that had never existed before. Human and Vellani children played together among the glowing trees, while their parents worked side by side to build something better than what had come before. Zethara joined him in the garden. the old Villani's crystal body showing the contentment that came with peace. "Do you think it will last?" the crystal being asked. "This alliance we have built?" Morrison watched a human child teaching a young Villani how to throw a ball, while the Villani child showed the human how to make a crystal flower bloom. "I think it will," he said, "because it's built on something the old council never had, the idea that everyone deserves protection, not just the strong." Above them, Alliance ships patrolled the space lanes, keeping the peace between worlds that had once been enemies. The galaxy was not perfect. There were still conflicts and problems to solve. But for the first time in centuries, the weak had protectors, and the strong had limits. The forgotten races were forgotten no more, and humanity had found its place among the stars not as conquerors, but as the guardians of those who could not guard themselves.